Hi, welcome back to the workshop where we've somehow found ourselves at episode 20 of the ES335 build. And even though it's taken us a couple of months just to get the body somewhere near finished, it feels like the time's absolutely flown by for me. But we're now at a stage where we can almost start working on the neck. But before we do that, I've just got a couple of little finishing off jobs that I want to do on the body. So in the last episode, we got the binding stuck in place, and for this operation I used acetone this time, which I've never done before, and I'm really pleased with how it's gone so far, but there is still quite a lot of work to do on these. Now the first thing I'm going to do is scrape all of these bindings level on both the top, the back and around the sides. Mostly on the sides they're pretty close, but on the top there are a few places where it is quite a bit proud, so that will need scraping off, and for that I'm just going to use one of these little one-sided razor blades. Very straightforward. But before I do that, I'm actually going to take a couple of little bits of the binding that were spare and were cut off from these ends, and I'm going to cut them up with a pair of side cutters, and I'm going to put them in a clean jar, and I'm going to add a little bit of the acetone that we used to stick this on into the jar, because I'm pretty confident that somewhere around this binding there will be a couple of little gaps, and what will happen is the little cut up pieces of binding will melt in the acetone and form a little gooey substance that I can then squeeze into any gaps, and then that will dry rock hard again. After a little while the acetone will evaporate and we can scrape that down, and in my experience it creates an absolutely seamless repair. Okay, so that's going to take a little while to kind of melt down. I might have to put a little bit more acetone in that, I don't know. We'll just leave it for an hour and see how it does. So while that's happening, we'll get the body back in and we'll start doing some scraping. Okay, so that's the top and the back done. Now it's just time to work my way around the sides, and it's the same process. Take the little razor and gently scrape the binding down. I've got to admit this is getting a little bit tedious now, but it has to be done, so we'll crack on. Now, I don't think anyone's ever going to say that scraping binding down is one of the most enjoyable jobs in the world. It is very time consuming and, if I'm honest, a little bit dull. But as we can see here, these bindings are seamless on the top. There's absolutely no gap at all. There's one little section on the lower horn where I'm going to have to do a little bit of work, but apart from that, they're absolutely spot on. And when I say little patches, I really do mean little, and they're so small that it's really difficult to get them to show up on the camera, but there's a little piece there you might just be able to see that's not quite flush with the top, and there's a tiny little gap in there that just needs a little bit of filling. It's all stuck down okay, it's just not quite making contact on that edge. So I'm just going to take a little bit of the goo that we prepared earlier, which has now become nice and soft, and I'm just going to squeeze it in to those little areas. Okay, so I've left this now for a couple of hours and it's nice and hard, so I'm just literally going to give it a quick scrape over. And it's like it never happened. It really is a brilliant way of doing those little repairs. I've had questions about the cutter that I use to cut these binding channels, and it's this. And it's very straightforward, it's very simple. I'm not a big fan of giving StuMac loads of my money if I think there's a viable alternative. And in this case, for cutting single ply binding channels, so the normal 1.5mm thick stuff, this is a really straightforward solution. And all it is a 1/2 inch pattern bit. But instead of using the 12.5mm bearing that comes with it, I've taken it off and I've put a couple of 9.5mm bearings, which I actually got off some cheap router cutters that came in a kit. They're small round over cutters, etc. Now the difference between the 9.5mm bearings and the 12.5mm cutter is 3mm. You half that, it's 1.5mm. So that gives you a perfect cutting depth for your binding. So that's the binding kind of finished off now. And for the time being, we're almost at the point where we need to put this body to one side and start working on the neck. However, there's just one little thing I want to do before I do that, and that is just to do some final detailing work on these F-holes. Now they're pretty good, I'm quite happy with them, but there's just one or two little spots where the curves aren't quite right, or, and I'll bring you in and show this in a bit more detail, where the sides of the cuts aren't quite square, so they're kind of angling away from the top, and that's giving the F-hole the impression that it's not quite where it needs to be. Okay, and I think a good demonstration is if you look around this little bit of the F-hole there, it's a little bit notchy. So it kind of goes round in facets instead of a smooth curve. It's a little bit the same in this area here. So that needs sorting out. And I don't know how well the camera picks this up, but just in this little corner, instead of going straight down, the face of this cut kind of kicks off that way. And it just gives the appearance that the hole isn't right. So to fix this up, I've got a couple of little tricks up my sleeve. I've got a little dowel with some 120 sandpaper on that I can use for the curvy bits, and then I've got a little set of diamond files that I will use. Primarily I'll just use this little straight one just to clean up all the flat, straight-ish parts of the F-hole. And it probably doesn't need a huge amount taking off. Just to smooth those curves out a little bit. And this is definitely one of those situations where if it looks right, it is right. So that's kind of made that look a lot better now. But I can still see that this corner here kind of kicks away at the bottom. So I'm just going to go in at a slight angle and just take a bit of that material off. And just try and go in with the file as well. Okay, and there's the F-holes all nicely cleaned up. I'm a lot happier with the shape of them now. They're a lot smoother. And realistically, for the time being, that's the last job that we can get done on this body. Obviously, we've got pickup routes, we've got neck pocket to do, and we've got drilling out for the tailpiece and the bridge. But I'm going to leave all of those until I'm at the point where I've got a neck almost completed. So the upshot is this is going to now be put away somewhere nice and safe so it doesn't get damaged, and I'll be making a start on the fretboard. However, I'm not going to cover that in this episode, but I will be back very, very soon when we'll make a start on that. So as always, like if you've liked, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.